From my experience, a lot of Alexander technique teachers think that when the arms are not being used, the shoulders and the arms should just hang, which I haven't found very useful as an idea.
To hang?
Yeah, they just...
What else would you do with them?
Well, you might have a little bit of tone in them. So
they can hang with tone.
I agree completely. But that's what I find interesting about, well, even partly about the language that's used. Because for some people, allowing them to hang and having some tone in them could be a slight contradiction.
Well, I think, because I talk a lot about this, the right arm of all the cellists I teach needs to hang, the arms hang from the glenoid cavity. I don't say that to them. From the place, and I show where it is and show them how the bones are. This is it hangs from there. And it tends to make, because people will talk about weight in playing instruments, we want more arm weight. That encourages people to collapse lower down so that the shoulder is more collapsed. And so I thought, after many, many years of a shoulder hang, well, of course it does. And it can hang sideways. I talk about the washing. You put out the washing in a high wind and it'll blow out horizontally. So it can still be hanging, can blow out this way, that way, but it's still hanging from its pivot there, up there at top. Pivot's not the best word, but anyway. Then I thought, how about saying your arm's suspended? And that might be better as an idea, because it puts the shoulder girdle first and the arm is suspended by from the shoulder girdle.
Maybe you could link that idea for me with something else I've heard you talk about, which is the idea, if I've remembered this right, that when the musician lifts their instrument, in that moment they're able to breathe in more easily. I think you said something similar about even when the pianist is bringing their arms up to the piano, their breathing changes. Is there a link there in how somebody uses their shoulders affects their breathing? How maybe just having arms hanging doesn't help breathing as much as having some more tone in them?
It's interesting what you say, because I say in my old age I've come to say you never lift your arms. You never lift your instrument. If it's a wind instrument, the mouthpiece, whatever it is, the reeds or the mouthpiece on a flute is the friend of your lips, and those two are designed to go together, so you allow them to come together. And of course, when that happens, your arms have come higher. But I don't think of it as lifting your arms. The instrument comes to your lips. And in the case of just your pianist, the piano says, come, and you go. That's not a sense of, I am going to lift my arms to put them on the keyboard. But the thing is that as soon as your arms come up, there's going to be a tendency to width, and the rib cage opens a bit, and air comes in. It's automatic.
I find that intriguing, because if we looked at one of the classic Alexander technique procedures, hands on the back of the chair, and how that can change somebody's breathing, I'd always looked at that as a person putting more weight onto their arms.
Now this is very interesting, because the way we were taught, there isn't really significant more weight on the arms.
Right. But I had looked upon it as having that extra weight on the arms being the thing that changed the breathing.
Well, you were talking about weight on the chair, weight of the arms on the chair, because I've seen that happening. That's what I don't recognize as something that, in my experience, having learned hands on the back of a chair where and when I did.
Yeah.
But as soon as you take your own arms out in front of you, you've changed your balance. And it's a little more taxing, isn't it? So you're doing a bit of work. And as soon as if you're going up, if you've got the springiness that you need to have, and you give yourself a bit more work to, that's going to expand the whole thing, the whole structure. And air's going to come in because it's expanded.
Okay.
And if you're going to lift something heavy, you will expand by exactly the amount that's necessary for that thing to be lifted.
Right. If we go back a moment to when you quite rightly corrected me about the vocabulary that might be used with the musician, because I talked about the musician lifting their arms.
Yes.
And then you talk more.
What I'm saying is a bit sort of refined. That's to say, of course, you can say you lift your arms, but if you think about lifting your arms, you think of getting this weight up there. Whereas if you think of this needs to come here, you might find the action is quite different.
I think that's me out of questions for the moment. So while we have it set up, is there anything that I haven't asked or haven't talked about?
No, I'm curious about the shoulders business because I've had a clear picture of how, of course, this is very much a concern when you're dealing with people, especially probably cellists. Walter Carrington said in his experience, which was by then about 30 years long, the people who have the most trouble are the cellists, which is a surprise to people because it looks as though we're all sitting nice and comfy, and that's the trouble, really. Yeah. But I have a great deal of trouble in all the years I've taught cello, to beginners to people with no significant ability at all, with the balance of the girdle and the right arm and how it has to extend to its full extent, and that means good support from the whole. They often doesn't get it, of course, and my view is very simple, really, that you have your vertebral column, and the vertebral column has all these ribs attached to it in the thoracic region, goes on to support the heavy head, and in the thoracic region with all the ribs make what we call a rib cage. I've never bothered about the word cage. I never think of it as iron. Always thought of it as a wicker bird cage or something like that. And the shoulder girdle, which is only attached to the skeleton at the sternum here, at the top of the sternum, is eminently liftable and eminently droppable. And I say to people, it floats on the rib cage like a boat on the sea. And if your rib cage if you're coming up and your rib cage is functioning, there's always that little bit of movement that, as there is in the sea, however calm it is, and your little shoulder girdle, light shoulder girdle, sits on top of that. So I look at it from that point of view. Then, of course, with all the mass of muscles that you get front and back, there's any amount of messing about with its balance.
And what you've described is a completely coherent picture, as far as I'm concerned.
Good.
But I think one of the problems with discussing it in general is that the discussion usually becomes a simplification. And there's a contradiction it can sound like a contradiction when we talk about the shoulder girdle floating and also talking about it hanging.
I'm not talking about shoulder girdle hanging. Shoulder girdle is supported by the rib cage like a boat on the sea.
Right.
And from the corners where the glenoid cavity is, the shoulder is suspended from the little, and that's in the shoulder blade, as we know. Yeah. Little process on the shoulder blade. So I regard the shoulder girdle as being supported from under, not held up from above. Yeah. And of course you have trapezius, which is tremendous quick-acting shrugger, which is always a danger. Yeah. And so long as this is stable, and it should be stable with that massive spine and the great elastic rib cage and the light pair of bones, that should all be secure and able to support the weight of a limb.
Absolutely.
And especially a live limb that's doing something.
Yeah. And I think that when the arms are doing things, for me it's less of a concern.
Yes.
Because there is action happening. But my perception has been about like I said at the start, when the arms are not active.
And how often in real life are you standing still with your arms by your sides?
Not very often, but if rightly or wrongly people get a message through Alexander technique that when they're standing, the arms should hang, then that sows a seed. I think in a lot of Alexander technique lessons, because musical instruments aren't being involved, and it might be somebody standing or somebody sitting. In a lot of those instances, the arms are just hanging, and it isn't going to be a big part of somebody's life. But during the lesson, during the Alexander technique lesson, it can be a disproportionate amount of time in which that's happening.
Well,
I'm not saying that it's right.
No. It's all this is interesting. And notice how when we get people to sit, we don't ask their arms to hang by their sides when they're sitting. We support them on the thighs, don't we, with the palms upwards, generally speaking. And also when I would never talk to someone who is having an Alexander lesson, now your arms are hanging, unless there was some reason to mention that, because they're going to be hanging. What I have said to people, do you notice that your elbows hang close to your waist? To relate, that was a big discovery for me, that's elbows and waist are at the same height.
Right.
And that somehow put something in place that I needed to have in place. Yeah. But I never think of this great limb hanging.
No, and but I think there is a bigger picture in the simplification of ideas that can happen, which is that because most people's issue with muscular tension is that they have too much, then the simplified understanding in Alexander technique can be that we're always reducing muscle tension. Whereas I think it's fair to say some people need at least some of their muscles to have slightly more.
Well, rebalancing tensions is what I say.
And I'd agree completely with it.
Yeah.
But if somebody picks up the idea that it's mainly about reducing tension.
Well, what are they understanding by tension, do you think?
I think what they're understanding by tension is when a muscle is to some extent tightened.
Contracted?
Contracted, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a better word for it, yeah.
Yes, so I think they feel tension when they feel they're contracted. And that's what tension is. But in physics, it's not that, it's stretch.
And that's wonderfully ties into the idea, as I understand it, where whether one of our muscles is contracted or being stretched, it feels the same to us. But I take your point.
So it bothers me, the way we talk about tension as if it didn't mean stretch.
Right.
You put tension on your cello strings by stretching them. I mean, that's right. A very, very small application, but in physics, that's what it is.
Yeah, and I suppose certainly for the tendons on both sides of the muscle, they are in tension.
And of course, you will have where you have undue contraction, you will have overstretch in the opposing groups.
Right.
But that's possibly what you feel. But still, people, I think, equate tension with this.
Yeah, shrinking. Either that reflex due to the startle reflex, or what I think of it sometimes as people being fearful and turning themselves into a smaller, harder target.
Shrinking, yeah.
Not being the complete person they can be when they lose themselves.